This is Wrestling Nostalgia Dave Dynasty. Greetings, wrestling fans, and welcome to Wrestling Nostalgia. I am your host, Dave Dynasty. Thank you for a special bonus episode. This is a bonus drop in between our two regular episodes, just for a little bonus content for you. Can I say bonus a few more times? I think I can, because I want to stress that this is a bonus. This is extra for you. And what we have today, we are being joined by Warren Evans, the preeminent Simpsons collector. He has this unbelievable Simpsons collection. He has also written a book on collecting. You can get a link in the show notes to his book to order it off of Amazon. There's also a link in the show notes to follow Warren on Instagram at Bart of Darkness. That is where he documents his Simpsons collection, what he has going on, his book, and everything else. It's a great follow. He also has a podcast that we discuss in the interview, so go check that out and subscribe. But we're going to get right to it, because this, like I said, this is just an extra thing. We're stripping down some of the normal bells and whistles and getting to it. But you might ask yourself, Dave, whoa, hey, this is a wrestling podcast. Why are you talking about Simpsons? Well, because the topic of conversation between Warren and I is pro wrestling in The Simpsons. There is lots of examples of pro wrestling popping up within The Simpsons, and I love The Simpsons. I love pro wrestling. Hey, I thought it'd be, just a fun chat with Warren, and it was. It was truly a good time. So I hope, even if you don't like The Simpsons, even if you could care less, I hope that you will listen, because again, this was a fun chat. There is lots of pro wrestling content within the world of The Simpsons and that series and all those seasons, 35 seasons of it. So hopefully you'll be entertained by this. So just give it a chance and stick around for that. But we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll have that interview with Warren Evans. So hang in there. If you like horror movies, be sure to check out Dave Dynasty and Ike Isaacs on the Listen to Their Screams Horror Podcast. It is available on all podcast platforms and on social media at Listen to Screams. That is Listen, the number 2, and Screams. All right, and we're back on Wrestling Nostalgia. This time I'm being joined by a Simpsons fan, collector, which is probably an understatement, author and podcast host, Warren Evans. Warren, how are you?
I'm fantastic, man. You were just ready to go with that intro. Wow, you are a true professional.
Well, I don't know about that, but I try. And people might be saying, hey, who's Warren Evans? But most of you may know him as Bart of Darkness on the social medias. And like I said, author, I got your book right here.
Wow,
and,
look at that.
Yeah, and like I said, collector's an understatement, man. I mean, you can see it in the background right there on your shot. Dude, you're the guy.
Hey, I'm trying to be, man. I appreciate that. You never know what you're getting into when you start collecting anything. I always tell people, because, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but people are like, oh, how does this happen? The answer is, I don't know. It kind of just snowballs into it, but that's like the short version, but it definitely, it'll get you.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And people might be wondering, well, okay, Dave, you got a wrestling podcast. Why you got a Simpsons guy on here? Well, that's because, man, there's plenty of crossover between Simpsons and professional wrestling.
There is.
And Warren, I listen to your show, your podcast. Simpsons is greater than. It's a great show.
Thank you.
And you've mentioned, hey, you were a pro wrestling fan.
I was. My God.
Yeah. So before we get into the crossover, the relation, when did you first discover pro wrestling? And tell me about your fandom.
So, I'll be honest, right up top, I haven't watched it in a very long time, but when I was a kid, I mean, it controlled my life in a lot of ways. Like, obviously, I was into lots of things, including The Simpsons, but I took few things as seriously as wrestling. I mean, I was that kid that was, getting into arguments at school about whether or not it was real.
Yep,
I was definitely that kid. And I read the comics. I read the WCW comics as a kid, and I thought, that all of this stuff was, validated what it was. So I would say it ebbed and flowed, because I loved Sting. I loved, all these sort of good guy characters. And then, I fell victim to the whole NWO powerhouse that we saw in the 90s. And I was all in on that. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, it made bad guys so cool. And nothing was cooler than when Sting, went to one and then he left and went to the Wolfpack and then he came back. And I just thought all of that was like you don't realize it when you're a kid, but it sort of scratches that, soap opera itch for a young
Absolutely.
mind. And I loved the drama. I mean, I would go to school just, can you believe Sting just turned his back on Wolfpack? Like I'm talking, like it just making such a big deal out of this stuff. And it was a huge deal to me. I went to see WCW Nitro when I was probably, 9, 10 years old. And I was in the stands when Diamond Dallas Page was like on the mic, from the stands, yelling on the mic. And
Yep.
I was up there, like, slapping him on the arm and cheering and yelling. And, this stuff is all burned into my brain. So I was a huge wrestling fan.
Yeah.
I say all that to say I loved it.
Yeah. And obviously, you're known for The Simpsons. Do you feel that through the 90s and 2000s, there was a big crossover? Because I do in the fandom. I feel
Yeah.
like it's the same audience for through the 90s and 2000s.
It definitely seems like, a lot of kids like me loved The Simpsons, and we loved, Ren and Stimpy. We loved South Park. We loved all of these sort of things. And some of the only quote unquote reality television that we had and most of us loved was wrestling. I mean, like I said, we took that very seriously. And I didn't want to hear anyone say that it was fake. I'd be like, oh,
Yep.
yeah, well, Ric Flair broke his neck. How could you say that? Like, I just thought that this was all
Yeah.
so intense. I think there was tons of crossover. I know most of my friends who loved The Simpsons also loved wrestling. So that's very true.
Yeah, I agree. And so like you said, I think you're primarily known as a collector, obviously.
Yeah.
That's your bread and butter. The Instagram, you got a huge following. I've heard on your show, you kind of started the Instagram to kind of document your collection as you were getting back into collecting, right? You
Yeah.
refound The Simpsons collecting.
Yeah.
How did it get to where you are now? Because your collection's unreal now. So how did it get from point A to point Z?
I honestly, this is so sincere when I say this, and that is, I don't really know. Now, when this all started, um, it here's like the most reasonable explanation. I spent a lot of time in bands, and I was, sort of traveling and doing things around, playing shows all over the country. And I don't want anyone to think that I was some sort of rock star. We were playing small clubs. I was never in anything super, super big.
Yeah.
Most small venues, but I traveled a lot, and I didn't have, tons of extra cash to buy, toys or all, anything at the time. I was spending it on food or records or stuff music related.
Yeah.
But I grew up a huge fan of The Simpsons, and I also grew up a bit of a collector. I always collected basketball cards, like I said, comic books, all these sort of things. So once I settled down and sort of, wasn't traveling as much, sort of had a little more time, a little more money, the thought of building a collection really appealed to me, sort of getting back into this, you know, part of collecting is research, right? Part of
Mm-hmm.
collecting is learning about all this stuff. And it's always appealed to me. It's always been sort of the way my brain works.
Yeah.
So when I settled down and I started, you know, maybe I'll get back into maybe I'll start buying Simpsons stuff. The Simpsons is one of my favorite shows. I was going through this sort of renaissance with the show at the time. I was really falling back in love with the show. Like even some of the, current seasons around that time. This is a little over 10 years ago. And Simpsons was on the brain. So I was like, maybe I'll start buying some Simpsons stuff. So I'd go to you know, a flea market or something. I would grab like a Bart doll and be like, oh, this will look cool on the shelf next to my DVDs. And then I would find some Burger King toys and, oh, I can lean these up against the DVDs as well. And before you know it, the shelf is like a wall. And then before you know it, you ran out of room on the wall. So you're kind of putting stuff in bins under the bed and you're kind of putting stuff in the closet. And so, the way my brain works, it just things sort of snowball when I get really interested in them. And before long, I not only wanted to find this stuff and collect it, but I wanted to learn all about it. I wanted to know, what year did this come out and how long did this line exist and what else did they make? And, over the course of a few years, we had to get a bigger place because I no longer had room in this apartment. And then we had to get an even bigger place. And it just, these things like really kind of take a hold of you, especially when they're attached to, like something like the Instagram. And once I had a reason, it kind of gave me an excuse to continue finding this stuff and buying it. So I guess the way it got from A to Z is, I can't stop myself. and I
Yeah.
just had to keep going until I got to this level.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can relate because I'm one of those guys that when I have an interest, I want to know everything I can. And I want to, I don't just want to know what's out there. I want to know the behind, right? How did this come out?
Absolutely.
How was this made? How did this happen? Why did this happen? I want to know the bells and the whistles and the how the sausage is made,
Yes,
so to speak. And
absolutely.
that's the fascinating part to me is talking to and hearing the stories behind the scenes and some of that. And you definitely, I mean, you do that, right? You have prototype stuff, you have limited stuff, you have international stuff that's just not wasn't available in America, and it's fascinating because everybody knows how marketed and merchandised
Yeah.
The Simpsons
Oh, yeah.
was, but they don't even grasp it's 100 times worse.
So this stuff, it really truly did, you know, so many people that follow me and listen to podcasts or, even know about Simpsons merchandise, they remember a lot of it from their childhood. They remember the Burger King toys. They remember, the Mattel toys. Most people especially remember the World of Springfield stuff because
Mm-hmm.
Playmates was such a huge thing. And a lot of those same people grew up with Ninja Turtles. And it was a natural crossover
Yeah.
when they started making Simpsons stuff. So people remember all of this. And I think most people would say, that they're like, oh, I understand how much Simpsons stuff that there was. But what you realize when you get into this hobby is most people, including myself, really had no idea.
Yeah.
So not only was America, cranking it out, but so was Europe, Japan, anywhere that you can imagine had Simpsons stuff. And in most cases, very unique Simpsons stuff to that country that so many of us, would never know about if it weren't for other collectors that did, tell the world about this stuff. If it wasn't, as much as I talk about my own book, one of the people I always give credit to, and I find any excuse to give credit to them, is Robert W. Getz, who
Mm-hmm.
did these 2 books in the late 90s. And without those books and without people actually taking the time to track this stuff down, I don't think people like myself or anyone would know nearly enough about this sort of thing. I mean, you start looking at all the stuff they had in France, all the ceramics, all the cookie jars, all the coin banks, like all of these things were just so unique. And I feel like as crazy and far reaching as other fandoms, Star Wars, all these things went, The Simpsons really did it unlike anyone. I mean, it's honestly hard to grasp just the
Yeah.
volume and the types of things that they were making. I mean, not practical stuff, toys, everything. It's just it goes across the board.
Yeah, which we'll talk about your book a little bit, but that's one reason to get the book because you touch on a lot of that and some of the more obscure. But let's get to the meat of the matter. Let's discuss some of the pro wrestling references in The
Yeah.
Simpsons, right? Because there's quite a few. And let's begin with probably the most obvious, and that is the Simpsons wrestling video game that
Oh
was
yeah.
released for PlayStation in 2001. I think I've heard you, and it is kind of widely kind of panned. It's not a very good game, but it is kind of the franchise attempting to do a crossover, something different. And while the concept's great, right? You would
Yeah.
think it should work. The game's not, but again, it's playing to that what we thought. There's probably a lot of crossover between the base there. Where do you feel though the game fell short in the delivery?
I mean, my hat is off to them for even trying because what is interesting about The Simpsons in the video game space is they really, much like the show would parody all of these things. The show always, poked fun at these tropes. It always sort of, would use these familiar ideas and sort of make fun of them. They did the same thing with the games. I mean, most of their um especially once they got to like PlayStation era games, their whole thing was sort of taking a popular thing and putting a spin on it. So they did this with other things as well, but the wrestling game to me really falls short. Uh, I mean, especially in the graphics,
Yeah, yeah,
and I mean, this is PlayStation. There's only so much they can do, and damn, they tried, you know.
yeah,
But I think the appeal of a game like The Simpsons or a property like The Simpsons in a fighting wrestling type space, you would have to be. It would have to feel a little more real. And I know that sounds hilarious, but what I mean by that is you basically have the characters looking exactly like the characters, like Ned is dressed like Ned. I think it would have made so much sense in retrospect to actually make it seem like they were wrestlers. Like put them
Mhm.
all in like wrestling attire.
Mhm.
You know, make it seem like this is, you know, a harebrained scheme of Homer's to make everyone start a wrestling federation, or so. There's like another avenue to make this a little more believable. So it honestly feels like you're playing like a poorly skinned wrestling game. Like you're,
Yeah.
it's like your friend bought a wrestling game and found a way to like hack the skins to make everyone look like Simpsons. It just feels very, it's clunky.
Yeah.
But I do think that the fact that it exists is honestly, I'm glad it does. I mean, I'm glad
Yeah.
all those bad games exist. It's just kind of perfect that they're bad. But
Yeah.
it just falls short in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And then let's move on. There's lots of wrestling mentions, appearances, and stuff in the show. Obviously, one of the most recognizable is in Old Man and Lisa,
Yeah.
and which is in season 8, 97. Mr. Burns loses his fortune, and Lisa's trying to help him get it back. I think it's a great episode. I love the episode.
And it's awesome episode.
Yeah, great episode. And I know you're a big Lisa fan, right?
Oh
So
my God,
yeah,
the biggest.
So but part of it is he's selling his house when he loses his fortune, and there's a scene where Bret Hart is seen looking at the home. It is hilarious to me because Bret Hart, even to recent time, often puts out there, "Hey, Ric Flair, hey, Hulk Hogan, you don't have a Simpsons figure. I got a Simpsons figure." he holds this, you know. He's always said Bret he's an artist, right? So
Yeah.
he loved the Simpsons. He's got that great line. What is that? Ooh, this place has got old man stink.
Old man stink. Yeah.
And it's so great. But it's a very memorable cameo in the show.
It's great. And I mean, what I will say, especially for those like NECA figures, is, you know, some people, you know, were disappointed in the fact that so many of those are celebrities, right? But at the very least, we got some really, you know, I'm thankful enough for the fact that we got James Brown and Bret Hart.
Yeah.
And that alone makes it totally worth it to me. And the Bret Hart one is like, it's fantastic. It's a wonderful figure. So, you know, I like this whole, you know, we get one quick joke from this character and he has a toy. Yeah. I mean, to me, that's just perfect. And also, I don't think there's anyone better that it could have been. He looks perfect as a Simpsons character. They get the outfit right.
Yeah.
They really nailed it. They really did a great job. And you know, he gets to say a couple lines. It's fantastic.
I mean, there's very few bigger than Bret Hart in the 90s and at that time. So he fits perfect, right? The bright, you know, that pink, Bret is recognizable though. It's great. In the episode Bart the Fink, which is in season 7, 96, there's a mention of Andre the Giant. Troy McClure says that the viewers may remember him, which is his stick, right? His shtick, as saying, "Such celebrity funerals as Andre the Giant, we hardly knew thee." So it's hilarious, but it's hilarious to be hilarious. You have to understand Troy McClure a little bit. So tell the listeners a little bit about Troy McClure and that running gimmick of if you might remember me in the show.
Sure. So Troy is, you know, for anyone that's not like a, you know, maybe you're not a huge Simpsons fan. Maybe it's just something you casually know and this character doesn't ring a bell for you. Troy is your quintessential washed up actor in Springfield. Like he's the guy that probably had a couple popular movies and now he's mostly, you know, I think if we brought him into modern day, he would be the guy that's like, you know, in like a Verizon commercial or something. It's like, oh wait, that's the guy from the thing. Like, you know, he has like this kind of second shot at fandom through almost like meme culture in a way, even though this didn't exist then. So he's sort of like this campy, recognizable, former famous person. And throughout the show, we really see him like, you know, fall lower and lower and lower. We even learn that he is apparently attracted to fish in some way and that is never truly cleared up for us. And we don't really understand that. But he just becomes, you know, he's like he's a shadow of his former self. He's just not, you know, he's just struggling to make a buck.
Yeah, and of course, you know, part of the genius is right. He's voiced by Phil Hartman, which God. I mean seals the deal, right? It doesn't matter what you put. Phil Hartman was going to make it great.
They literally called him the glue on SNL. He could just make anything funny. He was just the best.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's sad because losing Phil meant we also lost him and Lionel Hutz. Yep. And I got to think that we would have only gotten deeper into those characters as the show went on. So he did tons for the show.
Absolutely. Then another episode called Smoke on the Daughter from season 19 in 2008, where Homer makes Bart perform as the masked luchador El Guapo and is asking him to preen harder. Is this, as far as I know, is this Bart's only alter pro wrestling ego?
Yes. There is a time where Bart has the only thing similar is there's a time where he has like a robot and like a when they used to have the fighting robots on like Comedy Central. I'm blanking on the name of that show, BattleBots or whatever.
Yeah, something like that.
He does a thing like that, but this is the only time we really see him wrestle. So there's like other like fight-ish things like the robots, but yeah, this is his only wrestling alter ego that I can think of.
Yeah.
In 35 seasons.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously Bart's had several alter egos, right? And I know you're a big Bartman fan. So we'll taking Bartman aside, where do you think El Guapo stands on the list of Bart alter egos? And has it been underutilized in the show?
I would say yes, because they also, I mean, believe it or not, they did make like plushes of him.
Oh yeah.
But that's the only merchandise that I can think of that character is like a plush from Universal or something. But I think like most of Bart's alter egos, he's underutilized. I mean, Bartman is so underutilized, he barely exists. I mean, he's all over the comics, but I do want to say that now that you say that, and I don't want to be incorrect, this is something I talk about a lot. It's podcast brain, where sometimes you get foggy once you're on the microphone. But I want to say there's a comic book also where Homer and Bart are wrestlers, and I don't believe they're the same characters. I'll have to find that number and get that to you, because I know you're going to need that in the collection. But,
absolutely. Yeah.
I think they toy with that idea a little bit more in the comics, but in the show, that's all we really see. And I think I think the show now realizes that they can bring that stuff back a little more regularly. And back then, they just didn't look at it that way. Like, these things were often one-time gags that even the people in the world forget about. So I wish we would have seen a little bit more of that. Just like Pie Man, just like all of these guys, they could have done so much more,
Yeah. So probably the most pro wrestling heavy episode is Gorgeous Grandpa from season 24 in 2013. So in this episode, Abe Simpson, Grandpa, remembers his past as Springfield's heel wrestler, Glamorous Godfrey, which is kind of a play on Gorgeous George. And it's full of talk of wrestlers, all these wrestlers from Simpson, the Springfield's past and present. And Bart becomes enamored with Grandpa because of this. I think, man, this is such a fun episode. I mean, being a huge wrestling fan, huge Simpson fan, man, I think this is great. I love Grandpa. So I think I think this is a perfect scenario to put Grandpa in. I think this is a very underappreciated episode.
This is something, and I'm glad to hear someone else say. I mean, anyone that listens to my show knows that this is kind of, I've sort of built this part of me into like everything I do now. But don't believe the stuff you see online about how the show is bad beyond a certain point. I mean, you will literally find so many gems in these later seasons, and maybe they're a little less frequent. Like, maybe not every episode becomes like your favorite episode. Maybe you don't think about every episode for a week after you watch it, but like, you will find these episodes, that sort of reminds me, if I can just go off on a tangent, there was I was talking to someone recently from the show, and they were talking about how they had some of the musical scores from some of these later seasons. It was actually Russell Emanuel I was talking to. Shout out to Russell. And he wanted to just send me a couple of these scores, which I thought was so friendly. I was like, oh man, that's amazing. Thank you. I'd be so happy to have those. And he's like, could you, give me a few episodes that you like from these last few seasons? And I was like, oh, absolutely. Give me a sec. I'll make you a list. And, I was going through the last, from season 29 to current, and I was like, oh, I love that one. Oh my God, that one's great. Oh, I'm doing before I knew it, my list was like so long. So, while you may not believe me, and I'm willing to not be believed because I just know it's going to happen. This is like a controversial thing to say. The show still makes great episodes, even current day. So when you hear my man Dave here talk about an episode from season 23 and how much he loves it, you can believe that. There are great episodes in there. So
I truly believe people that not current Simpsons, they're not watching current Simpsons.
They're not.
I think they've stopped watching, because I'm telling you, especially the last couple seasons, man, I think they're right back in that groove.
They are making such good episodes right now. I mean, even it's honestly crazy, but every year, when the premiere happens, for the last couple of years, I've posted a thing that's like, hey, you can feel how you want to feel, but I'm just thankful that, at my age, I'm still able to watch the premiere of a new season of The
Yeah.
Simpsons, a show I've been watching my whole life. Like, that's so crazy that I can still be like, oh my God, here's a new season of the show. And, a lot of times people are like, oh, that is really cool, man. Like, I don't really watch, but that's awesome. And yada, yada, yada. And then, of course, you have the people that are like, should have canceled it after season 8. You
Yeah.
just get these people.
Yeah.
But don't believe that, everybody. I trust that Dave's audience is much smarter than that. I don't
I
feel
hope
like
so.
any of
I
you
hope
guys
so.
think like that.
Yeah. At least make an informed decision. And if you're going to say you don't
Yeah.
like it, at least make sure you've watched it. And like you said, man, not every episode's a home run,
No.
but there's enough there that I
Oh
think,
my
man,
God.
I think it's still, it's the show. That's the beauty of the show. I think it's always stayed fresh.
Yeah, totally. And they have to, you
Yeah.
can't expect, season 33 to be strictly for someone your age. You know what I mean? Like, it's,
Absolutely.
they still have some of those classic writers, but they have newer writers, and they also, they have to appeal to, like, today's humor, which is kind of in a good place. Like, it's not that different. Humor was in a weird place in the early 2000s, and
Yeah.
that's why some of those seasons are a little weird. I feel like humor is in a fairly good place right now, and there, it is kind of a good time for this kind of television. So it's more for you than you think. And if you watch an episode and you don't like it, maybe watch one more before you go on like a tirade on the internet.
Yeah.
Just give it a shot.
Yeah. And I think so many people talk about the association with Disney, and they thought, oh, this is going to ruin. I don't, because I think it just gave them something else to poke fun at. Because
Yes, totally.
they poke fun at Disney so much in recent episodes, and it's hilarious. And I don't know. I think I think it's this online culture of, hey, let's be mad at something.
I'll say it like this. Dave. If you love the show, don't make excuses to not love it.
Yeah.
Like, don't, if you really love the show, then go in with an open mind, and don't compare it to your favorite episode. Don't be so eager to dislike it because it's a little different. Like, take the humor for what it is. Take the newer episodes for what they are. Don't compare them to, Bart of Darkness, or don't compare them to your favorite episode. Maybe just, do your thing. It's okay.
That's right. It truly is. So there's also many other fictional wrestlers that are mentioned through the show's run. So let me list off a few, and you tell me if any of the names or characters have ever jumped out at you.
Okay.
And if you've ever wished that maybe we'd get some merchandise or more appearances from them, right? Okay.
Okay.
So here's a little list. This is just a sampling.
I love it.
There's Dr. Hillbilly. There's the Iron Yuppie, Dr. Bonebreak, Rumbelina, El Bombastico, Rasputin, the Friendly Russian, Werner von Braun, the English Pound, Captain Flag, and Half Mast. So do any of those jump? I'm you know what? I have to say I'm a huge flag of the concept of Captain Flag and Half.
Oh my God, so good. I've always loved the Iron Yuppie. I mean,
yeah,
I think, there's something to be said, and I understand that, like, this was kind of proven through the NECA line that maybe obscure characters are not the big seller for certain toy companies, but I think, and it's sad because Super 7 is like kind of taking a break from their deal with Disney.
Yeah.
I talked about that in a recent episode. I really hope they figure it out.
Yeah.
But this is the kind of line that needs to happen. We need to just get like an all out, here's all the like obscure wrestling fighter type characters from the show. Unfortunately, the only person that's adjacent to that we ever really get merch of is Channing Tatum. I mean, the boxer character makes a little more sense, but come on, guys, there would be some fantastic figures of these wrestling characters. I mean, just give me a whole set. Come with a little ring.
Sure.
Come on.
Yeah, not to mention, hey, you know what? WWE has crossed over with Ghostbusters and Masters of the Universe and done all these weird figures. Let's do a Simpsons, because WWE characters perfect for Simpsonizing.
Totally. I mean, come on. Let's get an updated wrestling video game. I mean,
sure.
This is the one thing that I've said so many times. The most wasted IP that the show has, or the most wasted things that they've made, are the video games, because now is the time to update those and re-release them. people would lose their mind for an
Yeah.
updated Hit and
Like,
Run or
yeah,
an
Hit and
updated
Run.
Road Rage.
Absolutely.
People would play all of these games. Simpsons skateboarding, people would play that. If they just released a slightly updated version of that with like the Unreal software, people would go nuts. So let's get an
Yep.
updated wrestling game. Come on.
Yep. It's in the name of my show, man. Nostalgia sells.
Yeah.
And it's funny because all of us who watched The Simpsons as kids, well, we're grown and got money now. We have money now.
Yeah.
So let's give us this stuff, and we're willing to spend. So
It's out there.
let's do a hypothetical here. So if Warren Evans, noted author and Simpsons collector, if you jumped into the wild world of professional wrestling, what would your name and gimmick be?
Well, this is hilarious because I can tell you because I had this all planned out when I was a kid.
All right, there you go.
So like I said, in the 90s, I was a huge wrestling fan. I played the video games. I watched it every week religiously. My brother and I would even wrestle each other in our bedroom to the point that we put a hole in his floor once from body slamming each other on the bed. My mom got very mad. But it should also be noted that this was the 90s and I was a huge Michael Jordan fan, like every other child. And I grew up in a state that didn't have a professional team. I grew up in Mississippi. We had no professional NBA team. So I just by default was like, well, I love the Bulls then because they're the best team in the world. So my whole thing was I wanted to be the Bull. Okay. And I had this whole move, which I can't really explain anymore. It was probably like 2 or 3 moves like combined within wrestling, but I had this whole thing. We used to like put a tape in the boombox and do like the walkout music and everything. We were so into it, man. This is something I've never really gotten to talk about. And it's kind of all just coming to me now. We thought this was the coolest thing on earth. So, in fact, no, I can tell you the move. I just remembered it, Dave. This is an exclusive for your podcast. All right. It was essentially, I would pick them up on my shoulders and I would sort of do I would spin them around into essentially like a sort of like a DDT type thing. I think there's a move similar to this now. Yeah. But I just thought it was so cool. And I even called it something. I had like a cool name for it, which I cannot remember. Maybe by the end of the episode, it'll come back. But I just thought this stuff was so great. So I would be the Bull. I don't know necessarily what my gimmick would be. I don't think I really thought far enough ahead of how I would look if I came out, but I
why
had
you would be a Bull?
Everything. Yeah. I mean, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I would wear I'd wear a necklace made out of horns or something. I don't know. But I had this whole move and everything. I had it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm telling you what, there's worse gimmicks in professional wrestling that out there. So that's not the worst I've heard. So we mentioned earlier that you host a great Simpsons podcast. I'm a devout listener.
Thank you.
Called Simpsons is Greater Than. You've done it for a few years now.
Yeah.
So what made you dive into podcasting? Did you just feel it was an extension of what you were doing on Instagram and exploring this fandom?
So it was really COVID, to be completely honest with you, because I had talked about doing it. I had sort of made excuses to not find the time for it, and when everyone was in their house bored, I was like, well, you know what? Now's the time. People will have time to listen. People will have time to come on. I'll have time to do the research, and so it kind of just felt like a good time to force myself into it. But it's interesting because the podcast has sort of morphed a little bit because when I first started, it was mostly interviews with people from the show or big fans of the show. And that was sort of what I was going for. I wanted every episode to be like interesting conversations. But along the way, I met this guy, Brandon Withrow, who made the viral Simpsons TV that I'm sure all of you have seen. This thing literally broke the internet. Like, I am not exaggerating.
It's very cool.
He caused a national shortage on the stuff required to make it. Like, you couldn't find the correct color for a while. You couldn't find the Raspberry Pis for the screen. He literally, I mean, this thing blew up in an insane way. It's one of the most well-performing threads on Reddit ever. I think it's like crazy. And I had Brandon on because everyone was posting this TV, but no one was actually saying his name. Brought him on, interviewed him. We really hit it off. We became friends. Now, long story short, he's the co-host. But I just wanted this show to be like a celebration of both fans, but also, the experiences of people who worked on the show, but also the hobby of collecting. I kind of wanted it to be everything. And I feel like now it's kind of just become, every week it's going to be something a little different. It might be a deep dive. It might be an interview. It might be discussing, the most searched questions about the people, the
Yep.
characters on the show. So now it kind of just is a lot of things. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. You
Yeah.
tell me, Dave.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good representation of the passion of the fandom, right? Because like you said, you do talk to people, right? And you do explore the online world. You talk about the collecting, you do trivia, and there's lots of different things because all that, whether it's Simpsons or whatever it is, whatever form of fandom, there's lots of different aspects, lots of different angles. And so why not explore those, right?
Yeah.
And it's fun, and it keeps it fresh and entertaining. And I think the best thing, like you said with you and Brendan, it feels conversational, right? It doesn't feel, scripted or whatever.
Right,
It's like two friends sitting down and talking about something they love.
You never know what you're going to get.
And well, that's a good thing, right? And on top of that, right, on top of the collecting and the Instagram, which you have a huge following on top of the podcast, which is great. Like I said, you have the incredible book now, right?
Yeah.
Which is Collecting the Simpsons, the merchandise and legacy of our favorite nuclear family. And obviously, I've heard you talk. This was a long dream of yours.
Yeah.
And the one thing I love about it, and you mentioned it really harkens back to those collector's guides that used to be everywhere. You could find a collector's guide for everything, and I loved them. I have a ton of them. I have the Simpsons one that you mentioned.
Oh yeah.
And but I have them for so many things, even stuff I'm just peripherally interested in, because I love thumbing through them and just seeing obscure merchandise that I never knew existed. And you certainly have that, but it's the cool thing is, man, it's just visually incredible. And there's just so much to it. Just in a nutshell, how did it come about, right? How did it transition from, hey, I have this collection, I'm documenting on Instagram, I'm doing this thing, let's do a book now?
It's kind of wild. And, I guess I don't really think about how much this is connected until we have conversations like this. But it honestly, the podcast in a lot of ways, not only did it lead to a friendship with Brandon and bringing him on as a co-host, but it opened me up to some conversations with some people that sort of more directly led to this sort of project. So a book is something that I wanted to do for a long time. But over the course of the podcast, I've had so many different people on, and one of those people was Lydia from the Simpsons Theory, who co-authored the book with me along with her husband James. And while talking to them about their first book, we all sort of had this collective idea of like, hey, what if we did a book together? And they contacted me after the episode and was like, hey, we had this idea, but we would love, we would only really do it if you were interested in working on it with us. And immediately I was like, yes, because the idea was to do a book that was not only about like the collectibles, but also just kind of about the broader fandom and all the different avenues, the comics, the physical home media, all of this stuff.
Right.
And I was being someone who wanted to do this and how this was sort of a dream of mine, like you said. I said yes immediately, and I was like, well, let's, what do we do? What's the first step? What do we do? So they got me in touch with the publisher they had already worked with. We kind of worked all the unfun stuff out, the contracts and all of this sort of thing. And then we just, kind of put together a plan. And, I couldn't include everything that I wanted to in the book. This is like the downfall of a project like this. You can't do everything. You start with this aspiration of like, I'm going to be the definitive, you're never going to need another book. And, as soon as you get about halfway through, you realize how impossible that is. I mean, this thing would be the size of, an encyclopedia if I truly got everything in there. But, I always emphasize the word first book, because who knows what we can do, from this. But, they came together. The short version is they came to me with an idea. We made this project work. I brought in my dear friend, Caroline Walker Evans, to take the photo. She did an unbelievable job. Absolutely. I would argue that the book would be nowhere near as good without her eye and without her talented work as a photographer, because, it's one thing to hear me talk about something from Japan. It's another thing to see this beautiful shot of it and really get to, I mean, these photos, you feel like you're holding the thing. I mean, the photos are really beautiful.
Yep.
And I'm allowed to say that because I didn't take them.
Sure.
But I'm super proud of how it turned out, even if I wish it could have been even bigger. So we'll just have to save that one for the next book.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Simpsons are still going strong. right?
Oh, yeah.
Not maybe not as I would say not. I'd love to see a little more merchandising out there in the general public, but it is what it is. Do you ever foresee, because right, the Simpsons are still going strong, still putting out episodes, still very relevant. Professional wrestling is a huge industry right now, right? Doing big ratings, big money. I don't think we've seen the last crossover between the two. I would have to think that at some point pro wrestling will be revisited in Springfield. What say you?
I really hope so, because I mean, this is, it's arguable that wrestling is as big as ever. Um, and I feel like there would be silly not to like further capitalize on this. I mean, we're seeing, I never thought we would see, like I said, I don't watch a lot of current wrestling, but
Yeah.
I never thought we would see someone as big as The Rock come back into the show and,
Yep.
and be so involved again. All these, I mean, Sting is still involved. I mean, all
Sure.
of these people that you just don't imagine. So I think it would be insane not to further capitalize on the popular. I mean, they're two of the longest running things ever. I mean,
Yep.
wrestling is like its own, huge mountain of lore. So you got to bring it back. You got to do something else with it.
Well, I hope so. And like I said, I think maybe, like you mentioned, maybe the best avenue is let's revamp that game. Let's improve that game. Let's do it right, because it's a little. I'm not saying the development, but the release is a little easy because you don't have to have a physical release anymore, right? Everything's downloadable.
Oh yeah.
So it's. I mean, personally, I think let's do Hit and Run first, but and let's get that there.
Give me Hit and Run.
I can't.
Disney's allergic to money if they don't do that.
I
don't
guess.
understand. I don't understand why people are crying for this game.
I
People
know
want this game so bad. And if they did that, I think they would see the value in all of them. I mean, if they reskinned Simpsons Wrestling tomorrow and threw it on the store for $5.99, $10.99, whatever you want to do, they would make so much money their heads would spin. People would buy. I mean, come on. I just don't think they realize how much people want this. And I don't know if it's tangled up in contracts or who knows what the real holdup is. I'm sure it's a little much for us to understand, but come on, guys, it is just a gold mine waiting to happen. I mean, look at Tapped Out. Tapped Out is one of the most money producing things the show has ever done. If that doesn't make your head hurt, then nothing will.
Yep. Well, let's hope, right? I mean, again, the show's still going strong. How much longer can Simpsons go? I know everybody always thinks that, right? Is there ever going to? But obviously, the voice actors they're aging, right? What happens when they can no longer do that? Do they replace?
I think you have to hang it up the moment.
Yeah.
The moment an original cast member taps out and can no longer, or maybe they could, but they don't want to anymore. You got to just fade it out. And here's the thing. I know we're living in a time of AI and people are convinced that you can, make anything work or whatever. The Simpsons is like one of those things that it's too sacred. And, I'm sure Disney would be tempted to recast or to find another way to keep the show going. But I think that is truly sacrilege to do that. And I think if anything, let the show fade out in the original run. Maybe a few years later, you bring back another version of the show, or you do a new take on the show. You play with the animation style, you play with the era. Maybe you do a show where they're older. Then you can toy around with the voices if you really want. But you cannot have the original run of the show with new people. You just can't. There has to be a separation. And the moment Dan or Julie or Yardley or Nancy or any Hank, Harry, any of them can't do it, you gotta be done.
I agree.
And that's my 2 cents.
I agree. And I think, hey, the world's wide open. Let's do some spinoffs, right? We can do spinoffs, right? Let's do some lesser characters. You can still keep that universe, that property out there in different ways, right? I mean, it's
right.
There's a right way to do it, and I don't know. Who knows? I mean,
give it a year off or something. Give it a couple of years off. Do revamp like some other version because you own the property. I think that's totally acceptable. I think people like me, they just want a clean break, and that's not just the OCD in me talking. Like truly, it just would feel weird any other way. Like you can't have 35 seasons with Dan Castellaneta and then all of a sudden the last like 3 years of the show, because to me it's negligent to go beyond those people. They are the show more than anything. So you got, I mean, without Dan as Homer, I mean, you could say the same for Yardley, Nancy, Julie, all of them. But you think about someone like Dan Castellaneta, he is so important to the timing and the humor and the feeling of Homer. You could never replace him, and even if you could, it would just feel wrong. I mean, just get that out of
here. Have you ever thought it through? To say they get to that point and they know everybody in the cast is okay. It's time. Let's just call it. They're going to get a clean end, right? They know when it's coming. Have you ever thought, how do we wrap this show?
Well, this is honestly the truth, and I wish that I could come up with a better ending. But what's funny about what I'm about to say is I cannot find it on the internet anymore, but I know 1000% that this was said, and it was in an interview with Al Jean, and I think it's the perfect ending, and I will say this till the end of time. He said in an interview once that the show ended in his mind. The ultimate end is for the last episode to end with them getting in the car to go to the Christmas pageant, which would make the whole show one perfect circle. It would end where it started, and it would kind of make the show like bigger than time, bigger than, like none of that other stuff would matter. Like how old they are, the technology, all of that would kind of go away. It would make this show like a perfect circle and make it a vacuum. And I just think that is so special. And I really hope that they've scrubbed it from the internet because they plan on doing it or something. Like I hope they were like, Al, that's too good, man. You can't keep saying that. We got to actually use that. So, if that ends up being the ending, everybody just know that I'm not crazy. Al really said that, and I heard him say it. So let's hope we get it.
I mean, that's poetic. That would be, I think it would be great. Well, Warren, thank you for your time. Thank you for discussing. I know we got sidetracked and everything. That's okay. That's cool. I love The Simpsons. I love pro wrestling. I could talk forever about the two. Again, I highly advise that everybody go out and get your book, Collecting The Simpsons, the merchandise and legacy of our favorite nuclear family. It's available pretty much everywhere, right? Bookstores, online vendors, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I know
if you go to a bookstore and they don't have it, I guarantee you they can order it. So I mean, anywhere I think you go to Target, they can order you a copy. So it's out there. I have a hard time believing you can't find it, but if for some reason you cannot, let's say you try your hardest and you're like, Warren, I can't find the book anywhere, DM me and I will send you all the appropriate links.
There you go. And then go on, subscribe to the podcast. Simpsons is Greater Than on all the platforms. Whatever your favorite is, it's there. Give it a subscribe. Your Instagram, right? Bart of Darkness. Is that the primary social media tool that you're still using? Best way to follow you?
Yeah, best way to follow me. We might toy with some new stuff this year, but for the foreseeable future, that is where I live.
Yeah, you're constantly active on there. You go live on there, right? You're posting reels, you're posting pictures, you're constantly on there. And so check it out. Warren, we've DM'd several times. You're very receptive to the people reaching out to you, wanting to chat.
Man.
That's the best thing I love, man. I love people that are passionate and that are at this certain level, right? I mean, I know you're humble, but you're at this certain level within Simpsons collectability, but you love talking to other people that enjoy this property.
I do, man. And Dave, seriously, man, I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that. I know sometimes I can be a little difficult. I actually accidentally, kept giving Dave the runaround on this podcast. And I'm so glad that I did, because this has been a blast.
Yeah. I mean, I remember way back, I messaged you about loving your show, and you recommended other shows that I would like. I remember you doing that for me, and they're great shows. And you're like, hey man, if you like this, check these out. These are good shows too. And that's great. Cause I hate gatekeeping, right? I like people that, if you're passionate about it, man, show the love. If you love it, share it with everyone else. I mean, why, the moment you take something you love and you try to keep it in a box, I mean, you're just killing it. Absolutely. Share it with the world. Talk to people about the stuff you love. It's fun. You'll have a better time. You'll be happier. Absolutely. Well, like I said, Warren's out there everywhere. Get the book, subscribe to the podcast, follow him on Instagram. You will not be disappointed. Warren, thank you for your time. It's been a blast. I know lots of people may say, why is a Simpsons, again, like I said, a Simpsons guy on a wrestling podcast? But man, it's because, I mean, we just touched a little bit of what the pro wrestling involvement in the Simpsons here. We found all kinds of reasons in mind. Absolutely. So Warren, thank you for your time. Thank you. I certainly appreciate it. And everybody go check Warren out in all those avenues. Thanks, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, Wrestling Fans International Association is back. That's right, the premier fan club association of the 1970s and 1980s has been revived and is back in business. Join today. It's free at thedavedynasty.org. That's THEWFIA.org. You can also join us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/WFIA 1969.
Okay, and thank you to Warren for coming on, chatting with me about the Simpsons and pro wrestling. Like I said, that was a lot of fun. Something that I've kind of had in mind for a while that I thought would be a really fun conversation. And, not to toot my own horn, but toot, I believe I was right. I think it was a blast. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I hope it gave you maybe a little more appreciation for the Simpsons and the connection to pro wrestling, right? There's a lot there, as we discussed. But again, if this did pique your interest, if you would like to further explore this and further follow Warren in the world of Simpsons and Simpsons collecting, make sure you go into the show notes, order a copy of Warren's book on Amazon. Make sure you click the other link, follow Warren on Instagram, and then go look up his podcast and give him a follow as well. I recommend that you do all those things. You will not be disappointed. Would Dave leave you wrong? No, absolutely not. So go do those things. Once again, thank you to Warren for coming on. Thank you for listening and sharing. We'll be back again next week with our regularly scheduled episode with lots of wrestling nostalgia goodness. So until then, wherever you go and whatever you do, be good, be safe, and keep on growing.